All right, welcome back to The Explainer. Let's just jump right in today. We are exploring a truly fascinating sermon by Pastor Thomas Hawkins, and it focuses entirely on the divine metaphors of light. He takes something that we literally interact with every single second of the day. I mean, you're using it to watch this right now, right? And he flips it completely on its head. We're going to look at how the actual physical properties of light, and just as importantly, darkness, serve as these incredibly profound, tangible metaphors for the divine. So get ready, because the way you look at a simple sunbeam, yeah, it's about to change for good. To kick things off, Pastor Hawkins brings up this old parlor game. You know the kind. Imagine you're put into a room for exactly 1 minute, and you're told to memorize absolutely everything in it. So you're studying the space intensely. You walk out and you start listing off everything you saw. The intricate pattern on the carpet, the velvet chairs, the sofa, maybe a vase of flowers over on the end table. You name all those physical objects. But almost inevitably, everyone who plays this game leaves one absolute crucial element off their list. The light. They completely forget the light. The very thing that literally made it possible to see the carpet and the chairs and the flowers in the first place is totally forgotten. And this perfectly sets up our core premise for today. The absolute most vital things, the things that literally illuminate our entire world, well, they're often so ubiquitous that they become completely invisible to us. That brings us to Section 1, the ubiquity of light, both ancient and modern. From the very beginning of human history, our spirituality and, honestly, our basic survival have been deeply anchored to the sun. I mean, think about it. 4,000 years ago in Egypt, the high god Ra was literally synonymous with the sun. Ancient peoples aligned these colossal structures, like Stonehenge in England or Newgrange in Ireland, precisely with the sun's movements. And early Christians, they definitely carried that legacy forward. Archaeologists actually excavated these second-century churches in Romania, and they found that every single one of those buildings was designed so worshippers faced east. They were intentionally looking toward the rising sun, which mirrored Jesus' description of himself as the light of the world. But you compare that to our modern architecture today, where churches are usually just oriented north-south for simple street access. It's kind of wild. Ancient believers felt the immense historical and spiritual weight of that light metaphor in a way that we've kind of just engineered right out of our modern spaces. But it's not just ancient architecture. It's our own bodies. Our biology is entirely 100% dependent on light. Think about photosynthesis for a second. It's taking sunlight and converting it into the very oxygen we breathe and the food we eat. But even beyond that, sunlight is what regulates our circadian rhythms. It triggers the vitamin D receptors in every single cell of our bodies. It dictates the rise and fall of melatonin, which, as we know, helps us sleep and acts as this super powerful antioxidant. Long story short, without light, we physically cannot function. Which brings us right to Section 2, the physics of the divine, unseen energy. Now here is the incredible irony of everything we just talked about. Despite our absolute total reliance on the sun for our food, our sleep, and our vision, we can't actually see sunlight itself. Let's look at the actual physical reality here. Light is electromagnetic radiation, right? It emits photons that travel through space. But a sunbeam is not a physical object you can just look at. You only ever see the objects that the light bounces off of. When you look at a green leaf or a red chair, you aren't actually seeing a beam of light. What you're seeing are the specific photons that the object rejected and reflected back into your eyes. The light itself remains entirely unseen. Isaac Newton's famous prism experiment actually captures this perfectly. White light is clear. It's completely invisible as it travels through the air. But because it contains all these different wavelengths traveling at slightly different speeds, when it hits that prism, when it finally interacts with an object, it literally breaks apart. And suddenly all that invisible energy just explodes into the visible spectrum of colors. You know what we all learned in elementary school as Roy G. Biv: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. So the crucial point here is this direct, super powerful parallel that Pastor Hawkins draws. Just like physical light is this invisible energy pouring into a room, ancient psalmists described God as an unseen fountain of life. We can't see God with our physical eyes any more than we can see the literal light waves bouncing around the room we're sitting in right now. And yet, just like those invisible photons that are feeding our cells and guiding our circadian rhythms, that divine energy is constantly pulsing life into the world, completely surrounding us. Let's see how this builds into our next concept. Here is Section 3, Becoming the Human Prism and Reflecting Light. If divine light acts exactly like physical light, well, a pretty profound realization occurs. It absolutely needs an object to bounce off of in order to actually be seen. So how does an invisible God become visible? Through us. When we intercept that divine light, we get to act as the prism. And the vibrant colors refracting out of us, they aren't red, blue, or green. According to the sermon, the colors of a human prism are our actions. It's bringing food to the hungry, caring for widows and orphans, visiting the sick. It's seeking justice in an unjust world and actively working for reconciling peace. When we do these things, we are quite literally making the invisible God visible to everyone else. And that brings us to section 4, finding God in the dark, the other side. Now, we are going to pivot pretty dramatically here. We've been talking all about the beauty and the absolute necessity of light, but we really need to flip the script on a massive cultural assumption. Seriously, what about the darkness? In our modern culture, we almost exclusively use darkness as a metaphor for evil. And honestly, that has historically spilled over into some really harmful dualities, even affecting how people with different skin colors are treated. We've basically created this rigid binary: light is good and safe, dark is bad and dangerous. But Pastor Hawkins challenges this directly. Is darkness actually the opposite of the divine? Well, look at this super surprising testimony from Psalm 139. It says, "The darkness is not dark to God. The night is as bright as the day." I mean, this ancient text completely shatters that binary we just talked about. It reveals that the divine is fully present, totally active, and incredibly bright, even in the deepest, most intimidating shadows. God doesn't just exist in the sunshine, right? God fully occupies the dark. Pastor Hawkins actually quotes author Barbara Brown Taylor here from her book, Learning to Walk in the Dark. And she points out something so fascinating. She says that we always announce resurrection and victory in these bright, sunny sanctuaries with streaming light and lilies everywhere. But actual resurrection, true transformation, it didn't happen that way. It happened totally out of sight, in this tomb-like silence. As she so profoundly states, new life starts in the dark. Just think about the whole concept of gestation. Pretty much every profound beginning requires darkness. A tiny seed has to be completely buried in the dark, heavy soil before it can ever sprout. A baby grows in the total darkness of the womb. In the biblical narrative itself, Jesus rests in a pitch-black tomb. Biological and spiritual miracles, they just don't start in the sun. They require the dark to begin their quiet work. Now notice the historical pattern of waiting mapped out here. It actually follows this really strict biblical rule of threes. Jonah spends 3 days in the dark belly of the whale. Jesus spends 3 days in the dark tomb. The Apostle Paul spends 3 days in total blindness before his sight is finally restored. It's this recurring, unavoidable timeline of gestation. You literally have to sit in the darkness, just waiting, before the breakthrough finally comes. And honestly, this isn't just some clever literary motif. It's completely tied to nature. Ancient skywatchers knew that every single month they had to endure this pause. When the old moon vanished, there were exactly 3 nights of completely dark skies before that tiny little sliver of the new moon returned. The darkness wasn't a failure of the light at all. It was just a completely necessary pause before the light's renewal. And we all enter the darkness in our own lives, don't we? It's that completely universal experience of just lying awake in bed at night. When you turn those lights out, your busy mind loses all of its daytime distractions. The phone is put down, the TV is off, and suddenly all your worries, your fears, your betrayals, or just your general confusion about the future, it all comes flooding in. And it can be incredibly scary because in the dark, you are stripped of absolutely all your defense mechanisms. You're completely forced to face what really matters. But it is exactly in those cracks of fear and vulnerability that we so often meet God. Psalm 18 says, "Lord, you make my darkness bright." Barbara Brown Taylor actually wrote that she learned things in the dark that she could never have possibly learned in the light. Things that literally saved her life over and over again. When we finally stop running from our dark seasons and just sit quietly in them, we allow that unseen divine energy to meet us right where we are. So as we wrap up this explainer today, I really want to leave you with this dual challenge. We live in a world that is desperate for light, but honestly, also terrified of the dark. So how are you acting as a prism today? What specific actions of justice and care are refracting out of you to make the invisible visible? And equally important, when life inevitably forces you into a season of shadows, instead of rushing to just flip on the lights, what are you learning in the dark? Take some time to think on that. Thanks so much for joining me today, and keep exploring.